You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. On today's episode of the podcast, we preview the semi-finals of the ICC T20 World Cup for 2021 between England, New Zealand, Pakistan, and Australia. It's the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast, and let's get started. Let's preview semi-final number 1 of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2021 between England and New Zealand, which will be played at the Zayed Cricket Stadium. Let's have a look at England's road to the semi-finals and talk about some of the challenges that they may face in this semi-final against New Zealand and their potential 11. England's road to the semi-finals, their first game against the West Indies, they won by 6 wickets. Their second game against Bangladesh, they won by 8 wickets. Their third game against Australia, they won by 8 wickets. Their fourth game against Sri Lanka, they won by 26 runs. And their last game against South Africa, they lost by 10 runs. What are the challenges for England in this semi-final against New Zealand? Well, the biggest challenge for England is how do they cover for Jason Roy? Jason Roy's been ruled out due to a calf injury that he picked up in the last game against South Africa. He's a big blow for England. His runs at the top of the order for England are important, especially during this T20 World Cup. His opening partnership with Buttler, very important for England's success in this T20 World Cup thus far. So he'll be a big blow for England because, especially in the semi-final where England, if they bat first, they'll be looking to post a big total on the board and hopefully looking to put New Zealand under pressure in the run chase. Obviously, when you chase runs in a run chase in a semi-final, it's big pressure. So without Jason Roy being on the side, they do miss some runs there with Roy being out of the side. And especially if England are looking to chase in the run chase in the semi-final, and New Zealand put up a big total, for example, and they're under pressure, obviously, in the run chase, they could have used Jason Roy to, get the team off to a good start with Buttler. So he's definitely a big blow for England. So that's a big challenge for England. How do they cover for Jason Roy, and how do they cover for his runs as well? So James Vince has come into the side to replace him. It's most likely that he will come into the 11 for this semi-final against New Zealand. He's a very good player as well, James Vince. So he's a good addition to England's side. But obviously, Jason Roy being out of the side is a big blow for England. So that's a big challenge for them in this semi-final against New Zealand. The other challenge is for England, how will their batsmen go against New Zealand's quality bowlers? It's important for England's batsmen to see off New Zealand's quality bowlers and Southee, Boult, Milne and Sodhi. England can't afford to lose early wickets, especially with Jason Roy being out of the side. If England are looking to post a big total or chase down a total, they can't afford to lose early wickets against a good New Zealand bowling attack. Buttler and Bairstow at the top of the order will be important for England, as well as the other batsmen to follow in terms of England setting a big total or chasing down a big total. So England, they've got to see off those quality bowlers in Southee, Boult, Milne and Sodhi. They can't afford to lose wickets early. If so, they'll be under pressure. So that'll be the challenge for the England batsmen, is how will they go against New Zealand's quality bowling attack. So it's very important for England not to lose early wickets and see off New Zealand's bowlers in this semi-final. If they do that, then they're a good chance of winning this semi-final against New Zealand. Those are some of the challenges facing England in this semi-final against New Zealand. Let's have a look at what potential 11 England may have for this semi-final against New Zealand. Buttler, Bairstow, Malan, Vince, Morgan, Livingston, Ali, Wokes, Jordan, Rashid and Wood. I think England will make only one change to their 11 for this semi-final against New Zealand. James Vince in to replace Jason Roy. Vince will probably bat down the order, and most likely Bairstow will open with Josh Buttler at the top of the order for England. England don't need to make any other changes apart from that forced change due to Jason Roy's injury. That could be England's potential 11 for this semi-final against New Zealand. Let's have a look at New Zealand's road to the semi-finals and talk about some of the challenges that they may face in this semi-final against England and their potential 11. So New Zealand's road to the semi-finals, their first game against Pakistan, they lost by 5 wickets. Their second game against India, they won by 8 wickets. Their third game against Scotland, they won by 16 runs. Their fourth game against Namibia, they won by 52 runs. And their final game against Afghanistan, they won by 8 wickets. What are the challenges for New Zealand in this semi-final against England? Well, I think the biggest challenge for New Zealand is how to combat England's batsmen. They need to take early wickets in the power play because England's batsmen are very dangerous, and when they're on, and they can score a lot of runs. Despite Jason Roy being out of the side for England, they still have other batsmen who can come in and score big runs and replace Jason Roy's runs. Josh Buttler, for example, that brilliant century against Sri Lanka, he just showed everyone why he's so good in ODIs and T20s. He's a very dangerous player. Bairstow, the same. Milan, Ali, Morgan, Livingston, and now James Vince is a very dangerous player because he's just come into the side to replace Roy. So they've got some star batsmen who can score runs. So the key for New Zealand, if they can take early wickets and put England under pressure with the bat, then they are a good chance of winning this semi-final. If they don't take early wickets, they could be facing a big total if England bat first, and you don't want to be chasing a big total in a semi-final because that often brings pressure, runs on the board. When you're chasing, that's a high-pressure situation, and often teams don't succeed. So for New Zealand, it's very important if England bat first to keep them to a low total, obviously, because if they chase in a big total, then they're under pressure dramatically, New Zealand. So they need to take early wickets to put the England batsmen under pressure. So that's the biggest challenge for New Zealand in this game, in this semi-final, is England's batsmen. They just need to take early wickets. That simple as that. The other challenge is for New Zealand, if they're batting first or chasing a big total, they need their class batsmen to get most of the runs. I'm talking about Guptill, Williamson and Conway. Very important to New Zealand's chances of winning this semi-final against England. If New Zealand are batting first, they need to put up a big total up against this class England batting lineup. If New Zealand are chasing a big total, they need those three in particular to get most of the runs. If they get out early, then it will be tough for New Zealand to win. So that's very important for New Zealand, that Guptill, Williamson and Conway fire and score runs. Because if they go early, then New Zealand will be under pressure. Because if that star England batting lineup gets a big total, and if they're chasing, especially in a semi-final where the pressure builds and builds and builds, especially in a run chase, if those three go early, then New Zealand will be under pressure. But if those three get going and score runs, then New Zealand are a good chance to win this semi-final against England. So that's the other challenge for New Zealand, is that they need Guptill, Williamson and Conway to fire, and hopefully for them get the runs if they're batting first and post a big total, or when they're chasing a big total, obviously get the runs and get New Zealand over the line. So that's very important for New Zealand in this semi-final against England. Those are some of the challenges facing New Zealand in this semi-final against England. Let's have a look at what potential 11 New Zealand may have for this semi-final against England. Guptill, Mitchell, Williamson, Conway, Phillips, Neesham, Satner, Milne, Southey, Sodhi and Bolt. I think New Zealand will keep the same 11 for this semi-final against England. No need to make any changes heading into the semi-final. This is New Zealand's best 11, and they've been playing really well together. So I don't think they need to make any changes whatsoever for this semi-final against England. That could be New Zealand's potential 11 for this semi-final against England. Let's preview semi-final number 2 of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2021 between Pakistan and Australia, which will be played at the Dubai International Cricket Stadium. Let's have a look at Pakistan's road to the semi-finals and talk about some of the challenges that they may face in this semi-final against Australia and their potential 11. In their first match against India, they won by 10 wickets. In their second match against New Zealand, they won by 5 wickets. In their third match against Afghanistan, they won by 5 wickets. In their fourth match against Namibia, they won by 45 runs. And in their final match, they won against Scotland by 72 runs. What are some of the challenges for Pakistan in the semi-final against Australia? The biggest challenge for Pakistan is, have they peaked too early? Pakistan haven't been really tested in this T20 World Cup thus far. The game against Afghanistan was the only game they were pushed and tested in this T20 World Cup. The rest of the games they just dominated because they're playing so well. It would have been good if they did lose a game at the Super 12 stage, though. Often when you win every game, you often get complacent and expect to win every time. But when you lose a game, it makes you refocus and regroup and reassess where you need to improve as a team going forward. And it would have been a good thing for Pakistan if they did lose a game. And I do feel that they probably have peaked too early. Usually when you peak too early, you often head into the semi-finals and you often play your worst game of the tournament. That usually happens with teams when they've done so well up front. They've played their best cricket up front, but you want to play your best cricket not up front in the tournament, but you want to play your best cricket where it counts the most in the semi-finals and potentially the final. So I do feel for Pakistan that could happen to them. That's a possibility. And we shouldn't rule that out because often when teams win every game, they peak too early, they've played their best cricket up front, which Pakistan have. You know, they've won every game of the Super 12 stage. They've played their best cricket up front. But when they come to the semi-final against Australia, they may play their worst game of the tournament. That is a possibility. So I do fear that Pakistan may have peaked too early there. That's the biggest challenge for them in this semi-final against Australia. The other challenge is for Pakistan is this semi-final against Australia will be their biggest test of this T20 World Cup. A semi-final brings different pressure compared to the Super 12 matches, and Pakistan will feel that in this semi-final against Australia. You lose in the semi-final, you're out. But if you lose in the Super 12 stage, there's no consequences. There's always an opportunity to bounce back. But whereas in a semi-final, you have the consequences. You lose, you're out, that's it. So Pakistan playing against Australia, which they haven't faced in this T20 World Cup up until this semi-final. Australia are looking dangerous. They're just starting to peak at the right time. The key for Pakistan in this semi-final is how they handle the pressure of this semi-final. And being one of the favourites to win, and people and fans alike expect them to win this semi-final against Australia, and expect them to win the final as well, if they do go on to the final. So that pressure of this semi-final, and that pressure of fans, and the expectations from pundits and commentators, how important it is for Pakistan to handle that pressure in this semi-final. They can't let that pressure get to them. They need to back their processes, back their routines, back the way they've been playing, and sort of forget about that pressure. But it's often hard to do that, where you know that people expect you to win and do very well because you've been one of the informed teams of the tournament, and they have been. They've been playing really well. And to me, it's been a different Pakistan team that I've noticed in this T20 World Cup. I think the influence of Hayden and Philander on the batsmen and the bowlers have done wonders for Pakistan. They just look like a happier team with smiles and laughing as well. I've seen from them in this World Cup. They just look like a different unit. They're a cohesive unit. They're starting to play well as a team. But how will they handle this pressure in this semi-final? That's the biggest challenge for them against Australia, because Australia are a very good side and they've been in semi-finals before in various World Cups over the years, and they know how to play in the high-pressure games. Whereas Pakistan, they haven't been to semi-finals all that often. So that pressure, it's how they deal with that pressure, Pakistan, will be very important for them in this World Cup. It's a lot of pressure on their shoulders, but if they can overcome that pressure and expectations, I think they're a good chance to win against Australia in this semi-final. Those are some of the challenges facing Pakistan in this semi-final against Australia. Let's have a look at what potential 11 Pakistan may have for this semi-final against Australia. Rizwan, Azam, Saman, Hafiz, Malik, Asif Ali, Khan, Wasim, Hassan Ali, Ralph and Afridi. I think Pakistan will go into the semi-final against Australia with the same 11 that they've had throughout this tournament. There's no need to make any changes into a semi-final. This is Pakistan's best 11. It's proven to be their best 11 because they've won every game thus far. So that could be Pakistan's potential 11 for this semi-final against Australia. Let's have a look at Australia's road to the semi-finals and talk about some of the challenges that they may face in this semi-final against Pakistan and their potential 11. So the road to the semi-finals for Australia, their first game against South Africa, they won by 5 wickets. Their second game against Sri Lanka, they won by 7 wickets. Their third game against England, they lost by 8 wickets. Their fourth game against Bangladesh, they won by 8 wickets. And their final game against the West Indies, they won by 8 wickets. What are the challenges for Australia in the semi-final against Pakistan? The biggest challenge for Australia is the Mohammad Rizwan and Babar Azam opening partnership. Australia will need to get those two out as quickly as possible, because if they get in and get set, they are very dangerous and could help Pakistan post a big total or chase down a big total in the semi-final. And for Australia, you don't want that to happen, especially if Pakistan bat first and these two get off to a good start. You don't want to be chasing big runs in a semi-final, because that often brings pressure, and when you're chasing in a semi-final or final, that pressure comes too much and you could lose the game. So it's very important for Australia, if they can get them out early, then attack Pakistan and put the rest of the Pakistan batting order under pressure in the semi-final. They are a good chance of keeping Pakistan to a low total if Pakistan bat first, or restricting them in the run chase if Pakistan bats second. So Australia will need to get Rizwan and Azam out very early in this semi-final. So that's the biggest challenge for Australia in this semi-final. The other challenge for Australia is their consistency. They need to back up their good performances from the last 2 games against Bangladesh and the West Indies, heading into this semi-final against Pakistan. Now, we know with Australia, their problems in T20 cricket of late is not being consistent enough and backing up these good performances. If they can back up their good performances with both bat and the ball from the last 2 games against Bangladesh and the West Indies, they are a good chance of winning this semi-final against Pakistan. The other thing that's probably in Australia's favour is the pressure that Pakistan are under. That often affects you as a team, especially in a semi-final. With Australia, they know Pakistan will be under tremendous pressure from all their fans, commentators and pundits and experts within the game who have tipped them to win this T20 World Cup because they've been playing really well. So Australia can feed off that pressure. If Australia can put them under pressure, that will build on Pakistan throughout the match, and it may go in favour of Australia. So Australia can build on that pressure and put even more pressure on Pakistan in this semi-final. So for Australia, they'll know that, and they'll play to that strength. So those are some of the challenges facing Australia in this semi-final against Pakistan. Let's have a look at what potential 11 Australia may have for this semi-final against Pakistan. Warner, Finch, Mitchell Marsh, Smith, Maxwell, Stoinis, Wade, Cummins, Stark, Stamper and Hazelwood. I think Australia will keep the same 11 for the semi-final against Pakistan. No need to make any changes heading into this semi-final in a must-win game, high-pressure game. This is Australia's best 11, and they've been playing really well together, especially in the last 2 games against Bangladesh and the West Indies. So that could be Australia's potential 11 for this semi-final against Pakistan. Let's predict who will win the 2 semi-finals of this ICC T20 World Cup for 2021. Who do I think is going to win the first semi-final between England and New Zealand? I think New Zealand will win this semi-final against England. New Zealand are playing some good cricket and will pose a challenge to England. New Zealand, I may feel, get the job done over England. Who do I think is going to win the second semi-final between Pakistan and Australia? I think Australia will win this semi-final against Pakistan. Australia are peaking at the right time and look dangerous. Most of the Australian players have played in high-pressure games and have that experience to handle that pressure. So with that experience in high-pressure games, I feel Australia may get the job done against Pakistan. As we know in semi-finals, anyone can win, and it's who's ever good on the day will win and go through to the final. But let's hope we have 2 close semi-finals, and may the best teams win. Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell to get the latest episodes of the podcast, and like and share our Facebook page, and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Until next time, keep safe, and bye for now.